Yes.
Hello, Kathy Kennedy. Welcome. We're practicing things. All right. Great.
Are you able to see it?
Yep. And we're able to hear you.
Perfect.
Okay. You've been here before. You know how to do this.
Yes, that is correct.
And I just, for whatever reason, I really don't know why our signups for this webinar have been much lower than our previous webinars. So there might not be a ton of people on this. So once it's like a few minutes after 4, I think we can get started, even if it's like there's only a handful of people on the webinar. And we're going to record it. So
Yes.
people will still see it after. So if there aren't many people on here, don't feel bad, because people will learn from you, if not today, other days.
Do we know anything about Emily?
Let me try to contact her.
Okay. So Kathy, that was a pretty impressive piece of work on the, what was it, a couple of years ago that the CUPW did on the whole struggle for the rural and suburban carriers?
It was a long struggle, that's for sure, but the pay equity, yeah, definitely paid off.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And it was a long time coming, and they still have a way to go yet. They've got equity, but they don't have equality yet.
Right. For that. Dennis, I'm on the webinar. Where are you?
I'm about to be on the webinar. Isn't it at 4 o'clock?
Yeah, but we're practicing now. So,
Okay, well, I'm glad you're practicing. I got my message from the webinar that said they were sending me a thing and they didn't send me any information.
Are you sure it's not in your spam or anything?
I enrolled, and the email I got sent me an invitation to enroll and no call-in information.
Can you register again?
That's the only reason I'm bothering you now. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Can you register again? Just to see if you get the link.
Okay.
I hope other people don't have this problem. There's Emily, yay. Oh, so Kathy, did you have slides or?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't.
You're going to be there in your Union Jacket splendor. Is that a Union Jacket?
Well, no, actually it's, I got it in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, when I was doing a benefit course for our members.
All right.
Yeah, I'm down in my basement and it's a bit cold today, so.
Uh-huh.
Where are all of you situated right now?
I'm in my bedroom in, I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah, in my bedroom in a chair.
I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Okay. All right. Nice to meet you.
I am in Washington, D.C., and hopefully it is peak allergy season here, so I have been sneezing. So hopefully I won't in the middle of the presentation, but it could happen.
I'm in rural Southwest Louisiana outside of a town called Elton, and it is also peak pollen season here, so my sinuses are not having too much fun.
So Emily,
Yeah.
we have practiced sharing video and sharing slides. Dave will have a video and Catherine will have slides.
Okay, perfect. And what order do people want to be in first?
We had set up to have Dave go first,
Okay.
and Kathy second, and Catherine third, and Sam last.
Okay. So David, Catherine. Okay, perfect. And so I will just like give a brief over, or I will just say a few words and then introduce each like speaker like really briefly before they present, and then we'll just take all the questions at the end.
And I encourage people to, oh, we don't have a Q&A. Okay, so we'll have to use the chat for questions and all that.
Mhm.
Trying to call in. Oh, that's later, last. We're fine. Hmm. Well, I don't think I'm looking for my start webinar button. I don't see it.
It should say like at the top, something about practice session, maybe, Jamie?
Yeah, it was there for a while, but now I don't see it.
Huh. Want to make me the host, and if I see it, I'll tell you if I see it.
Okay, great.
Okay.
It may be that we accidentally started the webinar already.
No,
No,
we didn't. Yeah.
it says that
It
it's.
won't admit me in any event.
Are you in? I mean, are you there, Dennis? Did you make it?
Oh, wait, we are.
It won't admit me.
Okay, well, we're in the actual webinar. I see there's an attendee here. You can see on the side, it says panelists and attendees. I'm going to make you the host again, Jamie.
Okay.
Dennis, I don't know why you can't get in. Give me 1 second. I'm going to send you the link that is for me.
Oh yeah, Deb's here, and are they? But they're so. And it looks like we're recording as well. That's exciting. I'm going to pause the recording.
Is Dave Stager. He is he is from West Michigan, Western Michigan, and he is a rural letter carrier and a member of the National Rural Letter Carrier Association. So let's hear from Dave. And you can also, just one more thing, you can also introduce yourselves in the Q&A chat for anyone who hasn't done so already. So let's hear from Dave.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Dave Stager. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a U.S. Postal Service rural letter carrier in Kalamazoo, Michigan, a member of the National Rural Letter Carriers Association, but I'm not speaking today on behalf of USPS or NRLCA. I'm also active in Communities and Postal Workers United and am a member of the Southwest Michigan chapter of DSA. I want to start with a short video, just a few minutes long. It was made about 25 years ago and has its flaws, but gives a quick overview and some images of the history of rural free delivery in the US. And I am untechy, so give me a second to share the screen and hopefully this works.
We take daily mail service for granted. But in the 1890s, it was an event when a carrier brought a letter to your front door. Unfortunately, home delivery was confined to the cities, and 2 out of 3 Americans lived in rural areas. It's hard to imagine just how isolated rural Americans felt a century ago. There was no radio, no daily newspaper, often little contact with the world outside. Farmers were expected to pick up their mail in town, winter and summer. When the weather turned bad, it might be weeks between visits. Yet farmers paid the same postage city folks paid. At meetings at the National Grange, the farmer's best friend, voices began to be raised. It wasn't fair. Responding to pressures from the Grange and sympathetic postal officials, Congress finally appropriated enough money in 1896 to experiment with rural free delivery in several communities. RFD caught on immediately. And though some senators complained that it would bankrupt the nation, petitions requesting new mail routes poured into the Congress, and all those farmers could vote. In 1902, rural free delivery became a permanent part of the postal system. But it wasn't easy. Less than 100 years ago, most of rural America was connected by only the rudest of roads. Yet rural carriers, who had to buy and maintain their own vehicles, were among the first to invest in the new horseless carriages. A 25-mile route could take a long time on roads like these. Postmasters had the power to refuse delivery to areas with impassable roads. So the farmers organized to build new ones, helping to spark a good roads movement. Its impact was felt all over the nation. Still, the Postal Service would carry only small packages. Giant express companies with powerful allies in Congress controlled parcel delivery. The fight was long and bitter, but popular sentiment won again, and partial post service began in 1913. RFD with parcel post transformed rural America. It brought the farmers closer to the markets and gave them more control over when to sell their crops. RFD enhanced the value of their lands too. But it did more than that. By bringing farm families newspapers, magazines, and mail order catalogs, it brought the world to their door. Life in rural America wasn't isolated anymore.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So that was sponsored by the Grange, a grant from the Grange, so probably gives the Grange perhaps more credit than it was due, although it was part of the movement to get rural free delivery. Rural free delivery, or RFD, came into being in the US because of a large populist movement. And despite RFD being called the most expensive endeavor in the history of USPS, it showed vast support for the idea that the US Postal Service is and should be a public service and not a for-profit business. US Postal Service began in 1775, and for nearly its first 100 years, people picked up their mail at their local post offices or paid a private carrier to pick it up and deliver it to their homes and businesses. In the 1860s, during the US Civil War, there were long lines at post offices of people mailing and receiving letters to and from soldiers. As a solution to this problem, free mail delivery in cities began. From the 1860s to the 1890s, delivery to rural towns throughout the US greatly expanded. USPS grew immensely after the end of the Civil War in 1865. The collapsed Confederate postal system in the South was rebuilt and replaced. The expansion of the railroads greatly increased the ability to move the mail across the country faster and more efficiently. In the 1880s and 90s, low bulk mail rates for newspapers and other reading material began. 1 cent per pound, about 2 cents per kilogram, and the equivalent about 15 cents per pound or 30 cents per kilo today. These low postage rates help support the rise of populist newspapers around the country, which in turn helped fuel the populist movement. The populist movement in the US was a coalition of rural reformers that advocated a wide range of economic and political change in the late 19th century. And the number of populist newspapers in Texas alone during this time increased from only 4 in 1892 to 75 in just 3 years later. And the amount of bulk mail sent between 1889 and 1896 almost doubled. USPS did this at a large financial loss compared to what it actually cost in transportation and labor to deliver this mail. Again, demonstrating that the US Postal Service was largely seen as a service, not a for-profit business. In the 1880s and 1890s, this great increase in the publication and delivery of populist newspapers, magazines, and books helped fuel the growth of the populist movement and their work in support for rural free delivery. Rural US residents, who numbered most of the population at the time, and populist movement organizations like the Farmers Alliance Movement and the National Grange petitioned and pressured the federal government to begin free rural delivery. As a result of this pressure, in the 1890s, RFD was publicly supported by the US Postmaster at the time and ultimately became federal law. RFD took several years to implement, in part because of opposition by private carriers and other businesses that thought they would lose money because of it. In 1898, USPS announced that any group of rural residents could obtain free delivery by petitioning their congressperson. A flood of petitions came in, and by 1902, there were 8,000 rural routes. By 1905, there were 32,000 rural routes, and today there are nearly 80,000 rural postal routes. In 1903, the NRLCA, my union, was formed and represented about 16,000 carriers. Today it represents more than 130,000 carriers. In 1913, again due to public pressure, the Postal Service began Parcel Post, greatly expanding its package delivery service despite opposition again from private carriers. This allowed larger items to be shipped through USPS, which was particularly beneficial to rural customers who didn't have easy access to stores. And between 1911 and 1967, a form of postal banking also emerged. By 1947, over 3.4 billion US dollars were saved and millions of postal banking accounts, equivalent to more than 400 billion US dollars today. Free rural delivery today, while continuing, faces many threats. Topping the list of the threats, of course, is privatization. The expense and unprofitability of rural free delivery means it would be among the first thing a private postal business would cut. FedEx, UPS, and other private carriers rely on the United States Postal Service to deliver their packages what is called the last mile, which is often many miles because it isn't profitable for these corporations to send delivery people to rural areas. Privatization would limit or completely cut delivery to many rural communities, or make delivery available only to those willing and able to pay a profitable price for it. We can resist US postal privatization in the short run by firing the current Postal Board of Governors and getting rid of the current Postmaster DeJoy, who has been laying the groundwork for postal privatization. In the long run, to stop privatization and protect rural free delivery, we need a large and diverse grassroots movement that represents the entire population, including rural organizations and individuals. Another threat to rural free delivery is the current state of the rural rural carrier workforce. There's a vast shortage of rural carriers today, resulting in many carriers working long hours with few days off. Another rural carrier, Alex Fields, who was also invited to be on this panel, couldn't be here today because he has no guaranteed day or time off from work and frequently is scheduled to work 7 days a week, often 12 or more hours a day. Rural letter carriers have a multi-tiered contract in which the bottom tiers have little or no benefits. It can take more than 20 years in some offices for a part-time, lower paid sub to become a regular career employee. While they wait, they have no regular schedule, earn no paid time off, no pension credits, and have subpar health insurance. These working conditions have led to a cycle of high turnover among rural carriers, especially subs, with more workers quitting, causing current workers to be scheduled even more hours, leading again to even more workers quitting. Alex asked me to mention a couple other aspects of today's crisis for rural carriers and rural free delivery: our pay system and the weakness of our union. Rather than traditional hourly pay, we have an evaluated pay system in which every aspect of the job is measured by a piece count and a Tayloristic time motion study. This has been a tool by which management has been able to radically deepen the exploitation of our craft's labor during a crisis like the current pandemic. Over the past year, thousands of carriers have essentially worked several hours a week for free because the package volume on their routes has increased dramatically, but their evaluated pay rates have not. And while there are contractual provisions or could be memorandums of understanding for addressing these problems, in practice, it depends on the power of a union to enforce the contract and push for solutions that help its members. The weaknesses of our union, have been exposed by this recent crisis in a dramatic way. Ours is a business style union with little rank and file involvement, inadequate communication between national leadership and members, and no member mobilization campaigns around contracts, safety, or other issues. In recent years, however, there has been a small but growing rank and file movement for change among rural carriers. There are several online rural carrier forums and podcasts that have arisen, which have sparked rank and file activism and involvement at the local, state, and national levels of our union. A growing number of rank and filers and lower tier workers are calling for better contracts, better communication, and better leadership from our union. And more are becoming stewards, officers, and convention delegates to help push these changes forward. This movement, while still in its infancy, along with the growing fight against postal privatization, gives some signs of hope for the future of rural free delivery and a people's public postal service in the US going forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing this history and this and the challenges in this contemporary moment. It was definitely very interesting to hear about the economic development of rural America, as well as the United States being contingent on free rural delivery. I think that it's something that that many politicians have forgotten today. So thank you so much for highlighting that and giving some, highlighting some ways forward as well. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Kathy Kennedy. She is from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. She served as a chief shop steward, a local grievance officer, and the vice president of the Winnipeg Labor Council. And during this time, she worked very hard to ensure pay equity between rural letter carriers and suburban letter carriers in Canada. So let's hear from her.
Thank you. I was also on our national negotiating committee, and our pay equity committee that finally achieved pay equity. Some of the history of our struggle is quite similar to what we just heard, at a different scale. We've got 8,530 RSMCs, our rural suburban mail carriers. And they are approximately 70% are women. And we're happy to say today, they actually make the same wage rate as the urban letter carriers that are predominantly male. While the pay equity study and the arbitration took 2 years to achieve, the struggle to actually get to that point was very long. And there were a lot of obstacles. And we didn't do it in isolation. It was many decades of struggle with, we worked with allies, progressive politicians, our union members, other unions, women's movements, the Canadian and international labor movements. And unfortunately, like a lot of pay equity struggles in Canada, many of the activists who were involved are not alive to see the results. For us, our first rural delivery started in 1908, and it was between 2 communities in Ontario. During the next 96 years, people who were performing this work did not have employee status. They were considered independent contractors, and they were not covered by labor standards, legislation, unemployment, workers' compensation, sick leave, vacation, that other workers in Canada and Canada Post do have. When they needed time off for any reason, they had to find and train and pay for their replacements. They did not have secure employment. They had to bid for their jobs whenever it was up for tender. And over the years, some changes were made to the bidding process, but it was not until January 1st, 2004, that these workers became employees of the Canada Post Corporation. In 1984, the Conservatives got elected, and they're our equivalent to your Republican Party. And in 1984, with their election, the working conditions became worse for the RSMCs. And that prompted an organizing drive. And while they had some success and even some legal success in front of the Canadian Labor Relations Board, the power of the post office and the power of the government success was short-lived. In 1981, Canada Post went from a department of the government to a crown corporation. And the government consulted with unions for 2 years over this change. And we were fighting to have the RSMCs become employees and have the right to unionize. Instead, what happened with the Canada Post Act, they inserted Section 13(5) that deemed the rural and suburban mail carriers to be independent contractors and not entitled to unionization. Then in 1986, the unions discovered Canada Post had a plan for a major restructure of the rural post offices. And we joined with rural organizations such as Rural Dignity, Solidarité Rurale, and responded with legal challenges and major public campaigns involving petitions. We have here that if you have petitions and you have enough names and you present it to your member of parliament, they have to read it on the floor of the government. And so we had a number of petitions, boycotts, direct actions, trying to prohibit the closures of post office in the rural areas. It was very effective. In fact, in 1993, the Conservative government was handedly defeated. They had 156 seats in a 295 seat legislature to 2 seats. And one of the first acts of the newly elected Liberal majority government was to declare a moratorium on rural post office closures. As of April 2021, we're happy to say the moratorium is still in effect. In 1996, CUPW, my union, started to organize the RSMC, but it was, we finally really got serious about it in 1996 at our national convention. We passed resolutions to organize all workers that processed or delivered mail or worked at postal retail counters who were not already represented by unions. This included private sector retail outlets, and it also included the RSMCs. The convention authorized a budget of $250,000 per year with the understanding that a campaign may take a decade. Delegates to the convention were told while the union hoped that we could have the RSMCs join CUPW, we recognize the possibility that the new organization might remain independent or join other unions. Although it was recognized that it was a long-term commitment of considerable resources, there was no guarantee of success, the National Executive Board was unanimous in their support for this campaign. In 1997, consulting with RSMC activists, it was decided that we would organize the RSMCs into an independent group organization as opposed to joining with CUPW, because there was a concern that they would be gobbled up by the big urban unit. So from the very formation of the Organization of Rural Route Mail Couriers, the ORRMC, they adopted the approach that the best way to overcome legislation prohibiting them from unionization was to act like a union. And they organized, they educated, they conducted public meetings. In 2002, that's when the OORMC felt that their members were confident enough to join with the CUPW. And so we started a organizing drive. They passed a resolution at their annual general meeting in March of 2002. We passed at our national convention in 2002 that we would organize. We did get enough signatures and we appealed to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board for certification as a bargaining representative for the rural route. At that time, though, we were involved in bargaining with Canada Post, and we had, the urban group had demands to have RSMCs recognized. Canada Post, typical Canada Post, filed bad faith bargaining, saying that we didn't have the right to force them to negotiate, and they refused to negotiate with us. And we just upped our campaign even more. And you have to understand, we're a huge country, but we're spread out. And so we hit every community, getting them to sign petitions, getting labor councils, town councils to submit resolutions to recognize these people. But initially Canada Post refused. However, in 2003, Andre Ouellette, who was then president of the Canada Post Corporation, approached the union and said that he might be willing to consider employee status for the RSMCs, but under certain conditions. First, Canada Post would require a long-term agreement that would provide financial certainty. Second, there had to be a separate agreement for the RSMCs from the urban. The third was that the RSMCs would be dependent on the RSMC contract would be dependent on the urban reaching an agreement without a strike. And finally, negotiations would have to be held separate location from the urban negotiations, and it would have to remain secret as long as possible. We found out many years after this that what was kept secret was the negotiations that were kept secret from Canada Post Board of Directors. Willette had 2 other people at the bargaining table, and they were the only ones at that time that knew Canada Post was in negotiations. So we agreed to this, and it was difficult. We did have the members take a strike vote, the urban members, and that way we had to have a strike vote in order to take any kind of industrial action, like a ban on overtime, not wearing the uniforms. We did reach a tentative agreement for the RSMCs. The last issue that was settled was that the RSMCs would be entitled to a defined benefit, fully indexed pension plan. So July 27th, 2003, that's when we came to the agreement. The members voted overwhelmingly to accept. It was an 8-year collective agreement. Canada Post would contribute $29 million in the first year, an additional $15 million each year thereafter. So it was a total of $652 million new money into the compensation. Overall, it increased the average compensation by 33% over the 8 years, but it was just the beginning of a very long process because a lot of it went into mandatory contributions like pension premiums, workers' compensation premiums. So not all the money went right directly to the paycheck. And they were statutory benefits, employment insurance, and so forth. What we also did when the money came in, we separated what was going into pay to some of it was direct, everybody would get a wage increase, but some of the money was targeted to the lower paying routes to try to bring everybody up to the same. It was mixed emotions on the results of the collective agreement, and the RSMCs were still far away from obtaining equal wages and benefits from the urban members. So in 2012, we were negotiating. RSMCs were negotiating. It was over. The 8-year collective agreement was over. That was their first legal opportunity to negotiate with the right to strike. And the message we put forward was equality. And it was a difficult negotiations because the Conservatives got elected again, and they went after the post office. The urban group started in June 2011 of rotating strikes. Canada Post locked us out, and the urban group, RSMCs, was still negotiating. Then the following day, the government introduced back to work legislation, and it was passed the very next day. The legislation contained some of the most restrictive anti-union provisions ever included in back to work legislation in Canada. And we did challenge it. We challenged it under our constitution. It was a charter challenge, and ultimately we did win. But in the meantime, we were forced to back to work, and to avoid the binding arbitration of the back to work legislation, which was going to take away our pension, we did negotiate a collective agreement with concessions, but it guaranteed our defined benefit pension plan. And due to that defeat with the urban workers, the RSMCs weren't ready to fight further. They demanded that we settled, and we did come to a settlement, but we did get some improvements for them. And part of that was changing their pay structure that before had hundreds of different pay. For almost each member had a different pay structure. We were able to achieve 3 zones where there were 3 types of pay. So we could have by 2016 be able to file a pay equity complaint. But we decided we weren't going to do that because what we had experienced was that the pay equity legislation was long and cumbersome and didn't really satisfy what we thought should happen. What we saw was that we had two other female-dominated working groups at Canada Post that filed pay equity complaints. In 1993, Public Service Alliance of Canada filed a pay equity complaint for their white-collar clerks at Canada Post. It lasted 28 years before they saw success. And even then, it was a reduced success. In 1994, Canadian Postmasters and Assistants filed a pay equity complaint, which was not resolved till 2019. So we rejected that approach, that we weren't going to go down that way. We've always been pursuing a more solidaristic wage strategy to have everyone paid the same. And we wanted equality through collective bargaining and not the pay equity process. So following the signing of the 2012 collective agreement, with conservative government still in power, we found out that they were doing yet another attack on the post office and postal service. And they had come with what they called a 5-point plan. And it was designed to reduce costs by about $1 million per year by 2020. And faced with this reduction in service and jobs, we launched a Canada Post, Save Canada Post campaign in 2013. And this campaign was probably the biggest we've ever undertaken. It included seniors organizations, organizations of people with disabilities, hundreds of municipalities, the union movement, political allies. And in some way, the campaign to save residential mail delivery served as a catalyst for the CUPW to return to its roots of campaigning and mobilizing the union. And this energy proved to be invaluable in garnering support for the union struggle for RSMC equality in 2016. When we entered negotiations in 2016 without any illusion of the task before us, RSMCs were earning 25% less than the mail letter carriers, and they were not entitled to a lot of the benefits. Still, there were reasons to be optimistic. The conservative government was defeated again. Majority of the Liberal government got elected. The first action of the Liberal government was to impose a moratorium of conversions. What they were doing was changing residential door-to-door delivery to community mailbox or lot line delivery to community mailbox. And a majority of they stopped that. They didn't reverse it, unfortunately, which would have been better. They changed the mandate of the Canada Post. The mandate letter provided to the minister responsible for Canada Post included objective improving labor relations. And the government also requested that the president, Deepak Chopra, resign from his post as the president and chief executive officer. At the beginning of bargaining, we decided to maintain the campaign mode, so we kept it up, adopting the fight against the loss of residential mail delivery, maintaining several full-time coordinators whose mandate was to organize membership actions, lobby petitions, conduct public education campaigns to build support for union contact, and especially the issue of equality for RSMCs. During the many months of negotiations, RSMCs, often with the union and community allies, lobbied politicians, attended Liberal MP barbecues, and actually we heard from the minister responsible for Canada Post that every time she turned around, there was a postal worker in her face. So that was good. Our goal was to achieve equality with the letter carriers. We even held a mass rally outside the constituency office of the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. When he first got elected, he commented that he was a feminist. And so we were reminding him that a feminist does not ignore pay equity. So the public campaign created a great deal of media coverage. One of the national magazines actually did a pay equity publication in which if you were a woman, you would pay less for that magazine than if you were a male purchasing the magazine, just to highlight the wage discrepancy. Through negotiations, though, it was still frustrating. We never threatened strike, but we took a strike vote again so that we can do industrial action, put some pressure on Canada Post without affecting delivery. The RSMCs for the first time actually had a strike vote, and we had 91.3% in favor and almost 2/3 of the membership voting. And this was quite something because some of them really had to travel far to actually get to the meeting to have a strike vote. Because under our Constitution, before you vote, you have to attend a meeting to find out what the issues are. And so instead of Canada Post this time going to a lockout, they appointed William Kaplan as a special mediator. And what was clear from meeting with us, that he was not getting direction from Canada Post, but he was getting direction from the high level in the government to bring the parties to a settlement. The union made it clear to him that he'd only get a settlement if the agreement contained no rollbacks, no concessions, and maintaining our pension and equality for RSMCs. Kaplan grudgingly had Canada Post commit to withdraw all their concessions. I think it was more of a arm twisting. Regarding the RSMCs, the government was clear that they could not give equity at this point in one shot, because it would have been a 30% increase. A negotiated wage increase of that magnitude for them would be politically impossible, because for the example it would set with other unions and employers, and that Canada Post management was adamant that the work of the RSMC was not the same value as that of the letter carriers. And so a recognition that we explained to them, we're not filing a pay equity complaint. They tried to push us that way. Instead, William Kaplan had us set up a memorandum of agreement that we would have a study and a possible arbitration of a fixed time to following the pay equity guidelines. And we agreed to this. And it was an 18-month process. And we talked with many members across the country. We had focus groups. Each side had an expert. And we talked with lawyers that were very professional in pay equity to help us set up this memorandum of agreement. We had them working with us on the study, and the collective agreement was voted on in favor of it, and we started our pay equity study. It lasted for the time specific. Canada Post tried to delay it, but the memorandum of agreement was clear that the arbitrator assigned to the pay equity study had to have a day available each month if there were any disputes, and neither side could judicially review it, because that was one of the delaying tactics that Canada Post would use, is appeal it, delay it. And we wouldn't let that happen. So we started this process, and Canada Post wanted a whole bunch of different jobs at Canada Post to be compared. Eventually, the arbitrator ruled it was just the letter carriers we were looking at. And so she concluded that their work was of equal value. We can figure out how she could do that, but rule that way. And then we had to get down to, okay, what's the difference in the wage rate? Canada Post still tried to maintain that the wage rate, in some cases, the RSMCs were getting paid more. And they tried to come up with a whole different system of looking at the cost as opposed to the wage rate. We were able to push them off that. And we looked strictly at the system and how much they were getting compensated. The arbitration decision in both decisions, as she wrote on is the work of equal value and whether its pay is the same. It was quite surprising. I've done most of my career is in grievance arbitration, and I had never seen a decision where an arbitrator went after one side as much as she did this in these two decisions. So she came down to a decision. We met her again, trying to figure out with what the difference in the wage rate is. And she came down on the side of the union and awarded pay equity for the RSMCs and benefits. And Canada Post estimated that the cumulative costs of the ruling for the 3-year retroactive period would reach $550 million. And the annualized impact on pay equity ruling in the future years was going to be $140 million. This was a boost for our RSMC members, but there's still more issues out there. We haven't achieved equality. Canada Post has said, yeah, they believe in pay equity, but not equality. So we think we've learned some lessons, that some of the lessons would be only particular to the years that we were there. But we think there's lessons that we can learn for all kind of campaigns. This is a quote from our former president, Deborah Burke. She says, looking back at our experience, I think there are some aspects of our struggle that should stand out for us and are probably important for other unions that need to overcome regulatory and legal obstacles. Because I have to tell you, we did NAFTA complaints, we did all sorts of complaints. Expert advice, don't be ashamed to ask people from outside organizations. Trade union allies, we get tremendous support from our other trade unions, both in Canada and internationally. Allies from outside the trade union movement, we needed lots of allies to help us in our organizing political campaigns. Academics, we never underestimate the importance of their support from the university community. Money, successful campaign takes people, energy, and more than a little luck, but campaigns also need a long-term commitment of money, resources. When we started, we decided we would fund the campaign for 10 years. Integration, we were fortunate in that almost half of the RSMCs worked in offices where we had existing urban members and an existing organizational structure, so we knew how to represent members. And we had to identify various options to success. There's not just one way to achieve success. We had to look at all of them and identify the energy and let them know what they have to do to solve our problems, be open with new tactics, and communicate regularly. So our struggle continues with equality and in revitalizing rural delivery. We're working with municipalities to strengthen the relationship between the post office and rural communities. We're also heading into bargaining this fall. So the struggle continues for us.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that long and successful struggle. I mean, it's really inspiring to hear all of your union's work and how they were able to prevail. And I think that we can apply some of these lessons in the United States. I'm gonna move on to our next panelist, Catherine Devine from the World Wildlife Fund, who put together a proposal called the Farmer's Post that reduces food waste and is a farm to table proposal. So let's hear from Catherine.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen, so just a moment here. Great. I'm sure folks are thinking, why is World Wildlife Fund on a panel related to the Postal Service? And I am certainly learning a lot from the other panelists, so thank you for that. I am Catherine Devine. I work on the markets team within World Wildlife Fund, where we look at markets-based solutions to sustainability challenges and challenges related to biodiversity loss and climate change. We specifically look at innovative models and how do we look at solutions that can scale and reach businesses, companies, government, consumers, various stakeholders. So we have developed this concept over the last year, especially in light of some issues that arose after COVID-19 kicked off. Things that I'm sure we all saw, shortages within grocery stores of food, people trying to get all kinds of products that were just bare shelves and difficult to reach. Meanwhile, seeing lots of food waste. I'm sure lots of folks saw headlines that millions of gallons of milk were dumped, or potatoes plowed under, various crops wasted because markets shifted, where restaurants were closed and couldn't take the products that they normally took, and farmers were unable to pivot to consumer markets very quickly. And food waste is an issue that we work on outside of COVID-19, and it's an issue that is prevalent even outside of the scope of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Postal Service is hurting for revenue, and there are a lot of opportunities for increasing revenue for the Postal Service, and this is one of them. In a nutshell, what we are proposing is a community-style agriculture type model of where a farmer will have prepare a box of produce. The Postal Service will either pick up the box, or the farmers will drop it off at the Postal Service, at a post office. And then the USPS will deliver to the consumer the next day. I'll get into a few more of the details, but this is still in proposal stage, so I'm very much keen on hearing from some of the panelists and continuing the conversation after today, because we are having lots of conversations about how to take an idea and make it a reality. So I'll go into a little bit more detail here. This would be based off of the regional rate system, delivering in zones 1 and 2. We're not looking at a cold chain, so cold storage is not an issue. We're looking at either the standardized boxes that the USPS already provides, potentially creating a new box size if it's deemed appropriate based on market research, and that this is going to use and leverage the existing structure of the Postal Service without necessarily adding a new structure, basically under the assumption that the postal service is going to consumers every day. They're going to farms every day. So how do we link these different things to bring more fresh produce to consumers that want it from local farms while also benefiting the farmer? So we're looking at benefits to consumers, farmers, and the Postal Service. I'm sure we all saw also during 2020 and 2021, still feels like we're in 2020 to me, that online grocery delivery has skyrocketed. I read some statistics that it accelerated by 5 years or more in terms of uptake of online grocery delivery. However, at the same time, online grocery delivery isn't accessible everywhere. Certainly not in all rural communities, not necessarily in all urban communities either. And even if it is accessible, it's not necessarily affordable. When certain services have either a subscription or additional delivery fees or additional tipping service fees, you name it. There's a whole host of fees that aren't necessarily affordable to all consumers, and yet the demand is clearly there. And even in a post-COVID world, the demand is going to be much higher than it was before. At the same time, speaking about the farming opportunity, this is just to illustrate that while there are certain areas, especially in the Corn Belt, where there aren't necessarily vegetable farms in every zone, the vast majority of the country has vegetable farms in close proximity to consumers. So we're looking at how do we leverage a local opportunity where consumers want to have fresh local produce. So what are we looking at from the USPS? As I mentioned, this is an idea we are still developing, but this has the potential to, with some very high level back of the envelope numbers that we'll continue to develop, 1.5 billion in revenue with just a 2 to 3% market penetration, 6 billion with 10% market penetration. And that's just, we'll continue doing consumer research, but very conservative based on the demand that we've seen for online grocery delivery in general. And if, because we're using the USPS, the ease of sign up, ease of use, knowledge of the brand of the Postal Service, I think the potential for uptake could be much higher than this. We're toying with, Farmers Post delivering food for all, branding TBD, ideas welcome. But, beyond that, beyond the revenue, which certainly all of the other panelists can speak to a lot more than I can of the challenges and opportunities for the Postal Service from the inside, is that Postal Service, to Dave's presentation earlier, is not just a purely capitalistic model. It is a community hub. It is a service to the community. It is beyond just a profit center, but this has the opportunity to bring in additional profit. But I think we are hoping that, if this could be successful, what other things could be added on or experimented with based on the innovation in this model. For the consumer, as we've seen, there's a high demand for fresh produce. Lots of farms that already had direct-to-consumer sales skyrocketed, and consumers really demanded it. Other farms were not set up for that, and there's a real interest in additional local produce. We've seen a skyrocketing of at-home cooking and access to healthy food. I think another hope from the consumer standpoint is, at the same time that we've seen an increase in food waste, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we've continued to see an increase in food insecurity. And we are, in addition to speaking with the USPS about this opportunity, also speaking with the USDA in the potential to consider whether the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program or SNAP benefits could be accepted within this model, or if there's a way to leverage the model to both serve all consumers and then with a particular focus potentially on those that are food insecure, which spans both urban and rural communities. The other benefit in terms of consumers is the Postal Service reaches the vast majority, of the country. I think someone, I'm sure, a rural post officer, postal workers can speak to this more than I can. There are a few zones where I think that it doesn't reach, but this has the potential to get where those other services do not. And that's why we see it as a benefit, because rural consumers, even though some might be in closer to proximity to a farm, that doesn't mean that they can go and pick up food from a farm. And they deserve the same services that other people deserve. So from a farmer standpoint, this is an opportunity to diversify revenue streams. As I mentioned, some farmers were already set up with a direct-to-consumer model, but others were not. And not all farmers either have the desire to set up their own marketing platform, or the time, or the technological savvy. But customer acquisition costs are high. It can take a lot to really reach customers and get the word out on your farm. It's a way to build that consumer to farmer connection as well. And then from the environmental standpoint, and why we at WWF care is a reduction in food loss and waste, which certainly was something that existed before the pandemic. We have a previous study called No Food Left Behind that looked at farm level food loss for a variety of different crops, ranging from potatoes to leafy greens, and the specialty crop wasted percentage before it even leaves the farm, before it gets into your home, is 2 to 50%, depending on what type of crop you're looking at. So this is an issue that has been elevated as a result of COVID-19, but exists outside of COVID-19. The other hope in terms of reducing environmental impacts is because the USPS fleet, Postal Service network, and logistics already exist, that the transportation miles won't necessarily be increased even if more food is getting to consumers. What's next? This is where I hope within the panel discussion or after the call, we can get some input, but where we are with this concept is having lots of conversations within the Postal Service. The Innovation Office is, we're talking to a lot of folks there, and there's a high level of interest, although as noted by the other panelists, certainly some challenges with the current governance system of the Postal Service, but I think there's a lot of interest and hope that this can be moved forward. We're speaking with the USDA, both the Agricultural Marketing Service and some other sub offices within the USDA that are looking to help create these additional markets for farmers and also get fresh produce to consumers. We're speaking with folks in Congress to get congressional support for the idea, and also veterans groups, since the USPS is the biggest employer or one of the biggest employers of veterans, around 25% or thereabouts. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. You know, I think rural delivery has challenges that are distinct from urban delivery. And I think Dave's speaking about the pay system, the shortage of rural carriers. Those are questions that we would need to take into consideration and want to get input, because this is the input stage for this concept. But the potential to solve it, this certainly doesn't solve the magnitude neither of the USPS's deficit, nor does it solve food waste as a whole, but it has the potential to demonstrate the kind of innovative model that can help put a dent in these issues, and then hopefully spur additional thought and additional innovation to reach all of these different stakeholders. So I look forward to your thoughts and input, because this is a co-designed concept where we are wanting to make sure that it is something that meets the needs for these various stakeholders, and look forward to some additional discussion with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing this very exciting proposal. Last up is Sam Sorensen. He is a postal customer as well as a member of the Southwest Louisiana chapter of DSA.
Hey y'all. So I live in Southwest Louisiana in a rural area outside of the town of Elton. Our mail says Elton on it, and we don't actually live in town. And especially in the past year with COVID, I honestly cannot imagine having to go through this year without the USPS. That has been pretty much the only way for me to make money. I make most of my money as an artist, and with all of the festivals and markets that usually take place in Louisiana, with all those canceled, online sales was pretty much my only way to make money. And I would say probably 99% of my sales, I use the post office to deliver those. And I actually really like Catherine's idea too. I'm also a food producer right now, just for my household, excuse me. But I'm looking in the future to branch out, and I think that would be a fantastic source of revenue for the post office, but also a way to get food to people and a way to support rural farmers, because there aren't a lot of opportunities locally to even sell food where I live. There's not a lot in town. There's a post office, and there's one local store, and then a dollar store, and that's all that we have. So, and we do have a farmers market monthly that hasn't happened since early 2020. So, so yes, basically we don't have any kind of way to deliver through paid services. They do deliver to us UPS and FedEx, thankfully, and that's not true for everybody in rural areas. But we don't have any way to send stuff out. There aren't any stores within an hour, I would say. So the post office is really major for all sorts of deliveries. For my food, it's been a way to get seeds, and it's a way for me to get supplies for my business. I get medical supplies. There's not a lot of other options. And if we had to pay like a UPS kind of price, it just wouldn't be feasible for me to run my business like that. Yeah, for rural people, it is just a necessity for many aspects of life. And especially in a time when it wasn't safe to go to stores and to do certain things. It's really been just a crucial element of rural life. And I'll say too, we got hit hard by 2 hurricanes last year, and the paid services did not deliver for months. And we, were without power for a while. A lot of people were without water. And at least in my area, the post office was the only one delivering within days of Hurricane Laura. And that was just major. That was the only way to get anything, because the stores really didn't have anything at that point. And there were impassable places. So just through all the challenges that 2020 threw at us, the USPS has been there to really help my community and rural communities all over the place survive.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience as a rural resident and business owner. Just the vital, your story really highlights the vital role the USPS plays in these communities. I'm going to ask a question to all the panelists, and please have your answers pretty brief. So we have an opportunity for other participants to ask questions. So my question is for all of you is thinking about just sort of this crisis moment in the United States right now with the USPS and this 10-year plan coming out. What are some concrete ways that individuals as well as DSA as an organization can take in this moment in order to maintain or even expand postal service in rural areas. Just thinking about just concrete steps that someone can do to plug in, that would be useful.
I can speak to that a little bit. One thing would be get this new Postal Board of Governors, the appointees approved. That's the most immediate. The hearing, and I know Jamie, others can speak to the exact timing of this, but that's coming up, I believe, next week. At least the first hearings on that. Biden appointed 3 new Board of Governors that seem much better than who we have. And that will help to try to stop at least the worst parts of DeJoy's plan. I think also calling for, like I said, the existing Postal Board of Governors who have helped cover for DeJoy, push to get them removed. So calling our senators, try to get these new ones in, get the old ones out, and then they can get rid of DeJoy. So those are some initial steps. And then there's a Save Our Postal Service Facebook group if you're not on that. There's Communities and Postal Workers United. DSA is doing great work plugging in with their postal work.
I think education too is really important. I forgot to mention that our DSA chapter, which has a wide range from about 100 miles from east to west that we cover, two cities, Lake Charles and Lafayette, and then the rural areas in between. And in Lake Charles, they had done our chapter had done a campaign where they set up a table with the postcards that DSA was providing to send out to Congress people, and just sort of raising awareness and giving people information for their Congress people so they could fill them out right there. And that, that was in the city. I think we could probably do stuff like that. It's a little bit harder in the rural areas since everybody's so spread out. And also it's hard to meet in person right now. But I think a lot of people don't really fully understand what's going on or what's at risk. And I think our chapters could do more to highlight that issue and educate people.
And I think we should use social media as much as possible, not just specific groups, web pages, but your own. If you're on Facebook, TikTok, whatever, share that information with your contacts, because let them know how they're going to be impacted by the changes that are coming. That will help.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we see this as a really timely moment for our concepts, but for action in general, is with everything that happened with interruptions in service last year due to some of the changes. It was a real rallying point for the Postal Service and brought consumer awareness, because I certainly, as a consumer myself, but as someone that follows, I live in Washington, D.C., so we are bombarded with news more than I would like. But it was a real rallying point for people that just love the Postal Service. And I think that, WWF is a nonpartisan organization, so my ability to say certain things is limited. But I think that those were, reaching out to Congress people, senators, and continuing to take action is the best way to push for additional change.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your advice. I will go to the first participant question, which is Jamie.
Hi, everybody. Jamie Partridge in Portland, Oregon. Member of Communities and Postal Workers United. I'm excited to have heard from Kathy about the struggle of the rural carriers to be able to get pay equity in Canada. And I know the Canadians have been years ahead of us in the moving community action to not only support the Postal Service, but improve the Postal Service. And I've heard that this Farmers Post idea that Catherine is advancing is also, there's something happening in Canada as well. I know delivering community power and a farm to table kind of proposal. Can you tell us something about that? What you all are trying to do in Canada?
Yeah, delivering community power and farm to table is, again, trying to get municipalities on side to push for resolutions to their local governments, to the federal government, provincial government, to try to make, as Catherine was saying, more of a hub for the post office, especially in rural areas where they could go to get fresh vegetables, where they could go to be part of the community. Because in a lot of our rural areas, they're losing their sense of community because a lot of the like banks and credit unions are closing up because of online. And so this is what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to expand that. We're having some success and trying to push Canada Post to pilot some stuff. We have in our urban agreement a dedicated committee that is funded by the post office that is to try to find new ways of generating service, new ways of generating income. And we've been having some success.
Does any other participant, thank you so much for sharing that information. Does any other participants have any questions that I'd like to ask the panelists? If not, then I will jump in. So I guess my question is for Catherine Devine. So I know that this proposal is in its fairly early stage in the sense that it's not, that early stage in terms of since it hasn't been implemented yet. What are average, if either DSA as an organization or just individuals can do to promote this idea? I'm sort of thinking in terms of contacting their elected representatives at a congressional reps, or thinking about on a local level, getting their city councils to endorse, write a resolution to endorse this idea, etc. Do you have any specific advice on how either individuals or DSA as an organization can promote this idea so it can become a reality?
Thanks, Emily. Well, I've shared in the chat an op-ed that we ran in the Washington Post on the concept, as well as the longer business case that has more details than I presented here. So one thing that you can do is to take them and amplify them within your networks and share widely so that more people can learn about the concept. And I think we are, at this moment, still working on those conversations with the Postal Service. Obviously, folks have detailed some of the challenges within the current governance structure that make implementing certain things difficult, but I think we have really promising conversations, and I would say, sure, reach out to Congress people and senators, but I think now we're having early conversations, and a time to push forward might come a little bit down the line. So I would say keep your ears open, and hopefully we can use these connections to reach out when there's a little bit more direct action, because I think right now we are hoping to get enough market research and some different information to take these conversations and move them from conversation to implementation. And one of the beauties of the model is that if we do a pilot and it's successful, it has the potential to scale immediately, unlike certain other models, because of the network that already exists with the Postal Service. So I think I would also be curious of attendees and fellow panelists, if I can throw a question out there of, I know Sam spoke about difficulty in getting services in the rural community, and Kathy spoke about banks and credit unions closing. If we're looking at the innovation of the model, are there other services that we could consider to make it more viable beyond produce, or other things that might be of interest within rural communities that could help bolster the model to boost the chance of success?
Was that a question to us or to anyone? I was going to say, I think postal, in addition to postal banking, also access to broadband in rural areas, just any kind of resources that they don't have, and maybe Sam can speak more to that.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing about postal banking. I think that is like a critical service that we need to be pushing for. Mindy Iser has a question. Mindy, you're muted.
Sorry, that's not actually me. That's someone who's like signed in as me because of the link. So I don't know who it is. Sorry.
Whoever signed in as Mindy Iser, unmute yourself. One that says vote Crew B.
Does anyone have any does any of the panelists have any questions for each other, or does any of the participants have any additional questions?
I guess I'd like to hear more from Kathy Kennedy of just that coalition building you talked about, and you mentioned some rural organizations, and like you said, you have the challenges of vast distances to cover. Just a little bit more of how that came about, and just any obstacles or success stories or lessons from that.
Well, one lesson for sure is that we don't have all the answers, and that even though we were a large organization, we needed to listen to the smaller groups, and we needed to connect with what their needs are and how the post office could connect with them and what they need. So for example, we have a large Indigenous population, and we reached out to them as well, and looking at setting up a post office on a reserve to provide more services in those areas that are not in the big cities or in remote areas. We've looked at providing, as you said, like broadband services to try to get communities in, trying to look at like some of the old post offices are larger areas in some small towns of having community meetings there. That was all before COVID. So it's just reaching out and finding. So when Canada Post came with their 5-point plan, 5-year plan, it was getting rid of the door-to-door delivery or lot line delivery. So dealing with seniors, dealing with people with disabilities, trying just to connect and looking at, you know, how is it impacting them, you know, and how we can have shared goals. And that helped us a lot. But listening is definitely something that we have to do.
Jamie?
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of time, and I just wanted to announce that the DSA4USPS will be hosting another webinar in May, which will have an impact similar to this, in that if impacting rural communities. We'll be talking about the attacks that are coming down the pike with the 10-year plan now being pushed forward by the Postmaster General and the Postal Board of Governors, which include plans to reinstate what was called the Post Plan, which was initially to close tens of thousands of rural post offices, then which ended up reducing the hours in thousands of rural post offices, and then to reopen that plan again, to go after the retail hours, reducing them from 8 to 6 to 4 to even 2 hours a day in some rural post offices. And then, of course, the other kinds of cuts and closures that are coming. So that panel is probably going to be on the 23rd of May. That may change, but I've already got the director of the Oregon Rural Organizing Project online to speak about the way that they've been able to struggle and save rural post offices. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for putting that plug in. And I just want to thank again all the panelists for sharing their work. This has definitely been very helpful to hear about everything that you've been doing. And I also want to thank all of the attendees for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.